Very good morning and warm welcome from Berlin, and good afternoon to our participants in Japan. Your Excellencies, honorable members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends of Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung, it is my pleasure to accompany you as a moderator of today's upcoming panel discussion. My name is Gisela Elsner, and I would like to thank my dear colleagues for the opportunity of joining you today. Ms. Rabea Brauer in particular, our head of the KAS Tokyo office, as well as director of the regional program on economic governance in Asia, and also my dear colleague, Ms. Barbara Völkel, who is in charge of the East Asia and Pacific department. Likewise, of course, to Dr. Peter Hefele, the head of the Asia and Pacific department. That is the department I actually belong to for 5 years until mid of last year, 2020, while heading the Regional Rule of Law Program Asia based in Singapore. I am now a policy advisor on global sustainability at KAS head office in Berlin. Our panel today is the second one in the context of the commemoration of 160 years of Japanese-German diplomatic relations, jointly hosted by the Embassy of Japan in Germany, represented today by their envoy, Mr. Kenichi Besho, who will speak to you in a moment, and by Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung. While this is obviously a moment to look back, we also want to look at the present and the future of these relations, at opportunities of moving closer to each other in a challenging multilateral context and in a world that is still struggling with the severe effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on almost every aspect of life. Towards the future together, as the title of the discussion says. After the first discussion on Monday, which some of you may have joined as well, which was more generally addressing an intensified cooperation in foreign and security policy, even though other fields of cooperation also already glimpsed through on Monday, the intention today is to apply a more of an economic lens and discuss the opportunities for a sustainable economic recovery, resilience, and transformation after COVID-19. Now, before introducing our panel of experts, whom we obviously sincerely thank for taking the time out of their busy schedules to provide insights into our topic, I would like to invite Mr. Kenichi Besho, the envoy of the Embassy of Japan in Germany, for his opening remarks to today's discussions. Mr. Besho, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning in Berlin and good afternoon in Tokyo. Distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor and pleasure for me to address you today at the second panel session toward sustainable economic recovery, resilience, and transformation after COVID-19. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung for organizing this panel discussion on a timely topic on the occasion of the 160th anniversary of friendship between Japan and Germany. I would also like to express my profound thanks to all those participating in today's session. The spread of the COVID-19 is having a major impact on global economy and business activities, including in Germany and Japan. In overcoming this crisis and achieving economic recovery, we believe it is important to look ahead to the post-corona era and create a new driving force for growth in the global economy. The keys to this are green and digital. Firstly, let me start with green. In October 2020, Japan's Prime Minister Suga announced that Japan would aim to achieve climate neutral and decarbonized society by 2050. Measures for protection of the environment cannot be regarded as constraint to economic development, but a key to transformation of the socio-economy, encouraging investment, improving productivity, and creating industrial structure and strong growth. To this end, the government of Japan formulated a green growth strategies in December last year. That strategy is industrial policy to link the challenge of climate neutral to a virtuous cycle between the economy and the environment, and it set high goals for 14 important individual fields such as offshore wind power, hydrogen, automobiles, and housing. In this regard, the government of Japan will make daring investment in the environment, including establishment of funds amounting to around 15 billion euros. The areas which the government of Japan support are firstly, the development of innovative technologies such as low-cost storage batteries and next-generation solar power generation. Secondly, decarbonization of the power sector, which is prerequisite for achieving climate neutral. Japan will expand investment in hydrogen and renewable energy, such as offshore wind power. And thirdly, the government of Japan intends to achieve 100% electrification of newly sold passenger cars by 2035. On April 16th, Prime Minister Suga met with US President Joe Biden in Washington. They reconfirmed their commitment that Japan and the United States will enhance cooperation in the area of climate change and agreed on the launch of US-Japan Climate Partnership. The partnership has the following three pillars. The first pillar is implementation of the Paris Agreement and achievement of the 2030 targets and nationally determined contributions. The second is clean energy technology development, deployment, and innovation. The third is effort to support decarbonization in other countries, especially in the Indo-Pacific region. Japan will announce an ambitious 2030 target by COP26, which will be held in November this year. The government hopes to advance the decarbonization of the world through joint research, international standardization, and infrastructure cooperation in cooperation with Germany, which is a leading country in this field. Next, I would like to share with you Japan's effort in digitalization. With the COVID-19 pandemic, our lives have changed dramatically. Remote school, remote medical care, home office, and online meeting have become part of our daily lives. And we recognize that digitalization is indispensable in supporting these new daily activities. At the same time, in Japan, various challenges have emerged, such as the slow pace of digitalization in administrative services and private sector, lack of human resources, and inefficient public services due to insufficient system integration. In order to better respond to this situation, the Ministerial Conference on Digital Government, chaired by Prime Minister Suga, decided the basic policy on reforms for the realization of digitalized society in December last year. Based on this policy, the Digital Agency will be newly established in September this year. The new agency is expected to serve as a control tower, which strongly promotes the digitalization of public administration while deepening partnership and cooperation among ministries and local government. For example, the government of Japan focuses on unifying and establishing standards for interconnecting diverse information systems in local government over the next 5 years. It will also promote the use of individual number card, known as My Number Card. That card will be used as a unified tool for various administrative procedures in the future. With the digitalization in our society advancing, data has become a source of wisdom, value, and competitiveness. In the COVID-19 pandemic, Japan has faced challenges that have been postponed so far. For example, the primary social data and data-related tools and platforms have not yet been widely available. While the data usage is expanding, related risks such as privacy, security, and data protection are rapidly increasing. Different approaches and frameworks at national or regional levels could be obstacles to the smooth and efficient data usage. Therefore, we believe there is urgent need to enhance international cooperation to promote data-free flow with trust, a concept which Japan proposed at G20 Osaka Summit in 2019. The development and maintenance of a high-speed communications infrastructure is essential for digitalization and data usage. While 5G infrastructures have advanced in Japan and Germany, the international competition for post-5G and 6G technologies toward 2030 is heating up. The government of Japan will support research and development regarding beyond 5G, including international joint research. In these opening remarks, I could introduce Japan's efforts in the field of environment and digitalization, which I believe are common challenges facing Germany and Japan. In addressing those common challenges, it is significant that Germany and Japan, which share fundamental values such as rule of law, democracy, and human rights, could work closely. Taking into account the fact that Germany will assume chair of G7 next year in 2022, which is followed by Japan in 2023, the momentum and the need for the further cooperation will increase in international fora. Japan would also like to promote the policy dialogue existing between Germany and Japan in the field of ICT, information communication and technologies, and energy and environment. I would like to conclude my remarks hoping that today's discussion will be fruitful and further deepen mutual understanding and cooperation between Germany and Japan. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Mr. Besho, for your really insightful introductory remarks, which I think really nicely set the stage for our upcoming discussion. And also, I would like to take the opportunity in the name of Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung to thank you for the long-standing support of the Japanese embassy in the cooperation with our foundation. As mentioned, really this introductory remarks were quite nicely setting the stage, mentioning two key transformations that refer to the green, the environmental area on the one hand, or the sustainability area, which is not only consisting of environment, as we know, and the digital transformation. And both at the same time present a particular challenge for all our countries, but particularly for Japan and Germany. Now, I would like to just add some housekeeping remarks at this stage before introducing our panel. I would like to mention to our listeners, first of all, that you're most welcome to send us your questions and comments through the chat for the Q&A session following the expert statements, and kindly indicate which of our experts you would like to address with your question. Thank you very much for that. And talking about inviting you, I would like to also take the opportunity to mention a survey that our colleagues from the KAS Japan office will send out tomorrow to our audiences of today's and also Monday's panel, and which we would like to kindly ask you to complete and send back, because this will certainly help us in our constant effort to make our work as useful as possible. Now it is really time to introduce our panel of experts who will kindly provide impulse statements on today's topics. But unfortunately, I'll have to start with announcing a last-minute change in the program, in the composition of the panel. To our great regret, Mr. Hideki Makihara, the member of the House of Representatives and director of the Environment Division of the LDP Policy Research Council, is unable to join us today due to important commitments in the context of his political office as a member of parliament. However, we appreciate that he kindly sent us his statement as a video, so we can still share his thoughts with you and his questions. And we would like to present this video to you now to further set the stage for our panel. And all three panelists all three following speakers are obviously invited to take up points in Mr. Makihara's statement if you like, and to refer to these points in your statements later. So I would like to ask our technical support colleagues to now show the video of Mr. Makihara's statement. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone. I'm Hideki Makihara, a former State Minister of Economy, Trade and Industry. And before that, I served as a State Minister for Health, Labor and Welfare. I also served as a Vice Minister for Environment, and currently I'm a Director of Environment Policy of LDP. So I'm in charge of environment policy as a whole in the ruling party. First of all, I'd like to thank you to Konrad-Adenauer-Foundation to hold this very important symposium. And I'd like to thank you to Ms. Gisela Eisner to be a chairman. Unfortunately, today I was scheduled to participate in the panel, but as often happens, I couldn't because of a diet committee of environment. So this is a videotape. As to today's agenda, I would like to present several points to be discussed between two countries. As you may know, tomorrow we have a summit on climate change. And it is said that Suga will present a new revised NDC under Paris Convention. And we had a heated discussion internally, both in the government as well as in the party. The number is still not clear even to me, but it is reported by the media. Japan revised NDC from 26 reduction target compared with 2013 to 45 to 50% of reduction. And this number is a very, very ambitious number. So in relation to this very ambitious target, I need collaboration or advice from German friends. Let me present several points. First, apparently we need to maximize renewable energy. But there are several difficult points. First, it becomes more difficult to get consensus from the people living there. Solar panel or window power, if we put these renewables to rural area where very few people are living, it's not so difficult, but we occupy these very best locations. So in order to maximize, increase renewables, we need to put the solars or wind powers to the area where many people are living. So there are many troubles between the power countries and living people. I would like to know how German government to solve this problem. And second, the cost. Of course, as more renewables we have, as cheaper those electricity power are. I know that, but still, the price from these renewables much more expensive than traditional powers. I'd like to know how German friends solve these issues. The third, I would like to cooperate with German friends on innovations. Innovations include batteries and hydrogen and other new technologies. The next is how to deal with traditional and existing power plants. The most difficult part is coal plant. After 2011 nuclear accident, almost 25% of total electricity comes from coal plant in Japan. I understand in German, coal power plants are main power sources historically, but the government has decided to stop these plants. How to deal with these existing plants are, our headache. It costs much, and reality it needs these existing plants. So I'd like to know the German friends' policy on these issues. And we try to develop the new technology such as CCS or CCUS. That means it is difficult to stop all thermal plants. So we try to catch CO2 and recycle this CO2. If we can do that, thermal plant can survive. So what do you see these new technologies relating to CO2? And the next one is nuclear plant. Japan is in a very difficult position because we experienced the nuclear plant accident, but still we have around 40 nuclear power plants, and we would like to use these existing nuclear plants, and it is very important for us to do so in order to achieve a new NDC target. I understand Germany has decided to stop a nuclear plant, but look at other countries like China and Russia or Middle East countries. These countries they have a plan to increase nuclear plants. And actually, there seems to be a new type of nuclear plants, like small module type or small medium type. So what reaction or what policy German government has in relation to these new nuclear technologies? And last is automobile industry. Both Japan and for both countries, Japan and Germany, the automobile industries are very, very important. But those companies are facing with the new challenges we call case. And the most difficult one is electric vehicle, namely EV. If all automobiles shift to EV, it is said there are many changes which affect badly to employment or small medium companies, which makes a lot of parts of automobiles. How German government is dealing with a new shift on automobile industry? That's my question. So I'm very looking forward to hear the result of discussions of today's panel. And I'd like to also contribute the friendship between Germany and Japan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for showing this video statement. And I think we can certainly say that after these inspiring words by Mr. Makihara, who raised many really relevant questions regarding challenges and opportunities for the cooperation between Japan and Germany, I am now delighted to introduce our most promising panel of experts to you. And I will be starting with Mr. Ulrich Niemann, the head of the Division for Japan, South Korea, North Korea, and Mongolia at the Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy. Mr. Niemann has an extensive experience in German federal administration with regard to economic policy, which is complemented by regional expertise on Northeast Asia, where he worked as a representative of the Friedrich Naumann Stiftung, a fellow political foundation. So, Mr. Niemann, we're looking forward to your statement, and the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and good afternoon to all of you. First of all, of course, I'd like to thank our hosts, the Embassy of Japan in Berlin, and the Konrad-Adenauer-Foundation for organizing this event and inviting me. I'm also very grateful to the inspiring contributions made by Honorable Member of Parliament, Mr. Makihara, and Member of Japanese Embassy, Mr. Betschel. Well, the theme of our session is very relevant, and to say it straight at the beginning, yes, I'm convinced that stronger cooperation between Japan and Germany and the EU, of course, will contribute to make our economies and trade relations more sustainable, resilient, and competitive. So I understood my task at this part of the session as such to stimulate the following discussion we will have in sharing with you the views of the German federal government on this very significant topic. So to achieve this, I would like to make the following points. First, although we are still battling with the pandemic and its severe economic and financial impacts, all the major structural challenges to modernize our economies will remain the same. And this counts also for our trade relations as before the pandemic. Both Japan and Germany and the EU are also fully aware of this and act accordingly. For example, if you look at the high volume stimulus packages to soften the effects of the pandemic, on both sides, in Japan and Germany, EU, you will see a lot of support that is designed to foster innovation and increasing long-term competitiveness and future growth. Despite the tragedy of such a severe pandemic, COVID-19 maybe even will accelerate the process of transformation in many sectors, and that was already mentioned by our Japanese friends in their earlier statements. Secondly, Japan is Germany's second largest trade partner in Asia, and Germany, as far as I know, is Japan's first economic partner in Europe. And in 2019, our trade volume even reached 45 billion euros. And what we have also to take into account is that this is a high quality relationship, and the division of labor is very, very synergetic. Furthermore, and it was already mentioned, Germany and Japan share the same values, which is a very important and strong foundation for a fruitful relationship and cooperation. And we have also, since 2-3 years, we have very conducive also political framework for cooperation, which is the Economic Partnership Agreement, the so-called Free Trade Agreement between Japan and the EU, the Strategic Partnership Agreement between EU and Japan, and since 2019, the partnership between Japan and the EU in connectivity and high quality infrastructure. So this, I would say, is a very, very additional conducive environment and framework for cooperation. So then the questions come up, what can we do together in order to make our economies more sustainable, resilient, and competitive? And for my ministry, I can tell you that we have created with Japan many bilateral forums to discuss the issues in which kind of future-related sectors we could cooperate together. And on the government side, of course, it's more, the work is done more on creating the right environment to invite experts, for example, to develop compatible standards and so on. I mean, it's at the end, it's left to the private sector and, of course, the companies to create real projects and cooperation. So first, Germany, the EU and Japan are committed to jointly respond to global challenges and to defend effective multilateralism and a rules-based international order like level playing field and a reform of WTO. This is even more important as we are, let's say, maybe facing a new growing bipolar order. And in order not to be sucked in, it is very important that Germany, the EU, and Japan and other like-minded are actually struggling here and defending the same agenda also, not only bilateral, but on the global level. Yes, the pandemic has shown vulnerabilities in certain global supply chains, even with an impact on domestic production. However, I mean, we always have to remind that first, the companies decide on their supply chains. The German government promotes more regional diversification and national reserves, well, as a lesson of COVID-19, of course, only for for sensitive medical equipment. But it is important to state that no complete relocation is intended. And decoupling, for example, to completely cut supply chains, redirect them, renationalize them, is not the right answer on these challenges. And this counts actually for all supply chains. Even facing a more than ever assertive China and also a distant US, because one thing I think is clear, that even under the Biden administration's economic policy, the domestic focus and priority will remain. The key answer to respond to this is to diversify trade relations. And the German government has stated this in its Indo-Pacific guidelines, which were also very welcomed in Japan, and actually made a commitment to stronger engage in Asia on one hand, and also to foster partnership with value partners such as Japan. And we see the same strategy followed by Japan in the region and on a global level to avoid one-sided dependencies and also a growing bipolar order. Another, I think, promising future-oriented field, and our Japanese friends have very much focused on this, is a green transition of the energy sector and the economy as a whole. We created, and we means bilaterally, my ministry and the Ministry on Industry, Trade and Energy in Japan, an energy partnership on 2019, focusing on renewable energy resources as green hydrogen, but also related technologies such as smart grids. I think we can focus more on the discussion on the questions MP Makihara raised. But one thing is very clear. This federal government has made a decision to foster the climate change related policies to make the German economy greener. And the EU also has announced a Green Deal. The idea behind is that in the, not even in the long term, but in the middle term, that the climate change will at the end create for us much more costs than a speedy transition of economy now. One can discuss the speed of transition, market distortion in choosing certain technologies. That is a thing one can discuss and can learn from each other. But I think to actually hold on with the old fossil energies for a much longer time will create a lot of troubles, which will be much more costly than a transition, which of course is not cheap and has led even in Germany to higher energy prices. The industry is very much complaining about. Another field is, and also here we are enjoying dialogue between the two governments, is the digital transition. And we are very grateful to Japan that under the G20 presidency, even the free flow of data was very much promoted by the Japanese government. But of course, we are also concerned about data security, rule of law and transparency. And also by doing this, safeguarding citizens' rights. So just in March, we had our 5th digital dialogue with the Ministry of the Interior and Communication. And one of the targets is how we can act jointly on a global level, actually to foster a free flow of data and data safeguarding rights. I also like to mention cooperation on industrial research and innovation, robotics, artificial intelligence, and autonomous mobility. All in these fields, a lot of synergies for Japan and Germany in particular to cooperate. And we are just about to intensify industrial dialogue between BMWI and METI. And we have already draft agendas on the table. I think this is very timely and very urgent to also increase our cooperation here, as we are also facing the same challenges, as it was mentioned, be it demographically, socially, and so on. Last point is connectivity and third market cooperation. Here also, Japan and Germany are, I think, very matching partners. Japan signed with the EU and connectivity partnership. My impression is there is still a little bit of disappointment on the Japanese side because the EU had a big idea, but of course, it has to be organized, it has to be financed. We are here even thinking on a, let's say, a little bit lower scale by really supporting certain market cooperation within the context of connectivity between Japan and Germany in fields where we can create a lot of synergies. Japan has a long-term experience in big infrastructure projects, and there's German technology which can contribute. So it could be a very good match. The difference, and this is a political even will behind it, to the Belt and Road Initiative by China is, of course, that this should be a value-driven project where you have equal partnership, sound and transparent financing, and synergies and benefits on all sides who are participating in this project. So thank you very much for giving me this chance to contribute a little bit to our discussion. I'm very happy, looking forward to join it. Thank you.
Mr. Niemann, for your insightful comments from a government perspective, and for actually inviting for further cooperation, for more deepened cooperation of a relationship that, as you mentioned, already has a very high quality. Now, time is flying, and so I would like to move on to our next speaker, which is Dr. Hubertus Barth. He's the Managing Director and Head of Research at the German Economic Institute in Cologne. And Dr. Barth spent more than 20 years with the Institute and has a vast research experience with regard to energy, environment, and resources. So over to you, Dr. Barth, and I would like to, at the same time, take the opportunity to remind our remaining speakers to take a little bit a look at the timing, because we also want to have some time for questions and answers after your statements. Over to you, Dr. Barth. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me and for the introduction. I've prepared 5 slides, and I try to keep it at 1 minute per slide, so hopefully not much longer. Then I wanted to start with where do we come from? So it's the next one, actually. Where do we come from? The topic of today is sustainable economic recovery. So recovery means that there's a situation where to recover from, and that's the COVID crisis, the still ongoing COVID crisis. And as you see on this chart, it shows the expectations of economic outputs prior to the crisis and what really happened last year. We had a drop of 12% in GDP in the second quarter, and well, then recovered quite quickly, but we are still on a much lower growth path, and we lost about €250 billion just last year. And that means that this is money that would, of course, have been well needed for the modernization and the transition processes we are talking about. The next slide, you see that the drop was even larger in manufacturing. And most of those transitions we are talking about is very much about manufacturing. We had a drop in manufacturing by 30% and a drop in the automotive industry by 84% in April last year, and a very quick recovery, but still not to a pre-crisis level. Compared with the global financial crisis, that drop is much deeper. It's a much more severe crisis, but a very timely limited one, very quick recovery, much quicker recovery. But in the end, it took us about 2 years, 10 years ago to recover from that crisis and to start almost a decade of constant growth. And now again, it will take about 2 years until we come to pre-crisis level in industrial production and as well as in GDP. So right for the time being, from the economic perspective, that's the most important priority on the short term. On the next slides, they are the most important priorities on the medium and long term. We should never forget that these long-term trends with very disruptive potential for our industrial structure, they already have been there prior to the crisis. And we are losing, well, we've lost a year, we could lose 2 years or more if we don't take into account and don't consider what's happening here, especially because some of these trends are even have even gained momentum due to the crisis. So digitalization, there was a push of digitalization last year, at least in Germany. The big digital corporations have been very successful last year. Their power even has increased. So pressure for existing and traditional industrial and industry-related service companies has become even higher and even more important. We've done a survey that's not published yet. That's because that's why there are no figures at this graph. We asked companies, what are your main priorities? What's high or rather high relevance for your business from today's perspective? And about 60% of the companies believe that demography, so securing skilled workers in the future, and digitization is most important for them. That's much more than energy transition and climate change. But the reason is not that climate change is not important, but many companies don't really need a lot of energy or are not very climate or carbon intensive. So that's why the priority is lower. And then interestingly, at about 20% of the companies, they mentioned protectionism and the competition with China, not only on the market level, but also on the economic system level. So that's important for a lot of bigger companies and also medium-sized companies, very specialized, that need global markets to be successful. What does it mean for national economic policy? That's on the next slide. What we need is, well, first of all, we're talking about modernization of the manufacturing sector. And modernization needs investment. And so what we need to do is to improve investment conditions. And investment conditions generally, but also specifically as an answer to the most pressing challenges. So traditionally, what is part of the German industrial policy is the so-called horizontal industrial policy. So measures to improve investment conditions, to attract capital, and therefore to promote industry in the country. So it's about taxes, and corporate taxes are relatively high in Germany. It's about energy costs. Energy costs are high for many of those that has already been mentioned. We're talking about infrastructure, transport infrastructure, but also digital infrastructure and innovation infrastructure. Innovation policy is one of the main drivers of prosperity. And we are talking about open borders. So access to the global markets and that's in some respects difference between Germany and Japan. It's more important for Germany, as Germany is among the most open economies, and we have many of those hidden champions who cannot be successful without having access to more or less the whole world. But that's traditional industrial policy. That's important. What we need in order to focus and to cope with those challenges with disruptive potential is also something we don't really have experience or have much experience with. It's more vertical elements of industrial policy. So we need to improve the conditions for digitization and for climate protection. Why that? Digitization means that many of the knowledge which is there, the experience, the business cases might be devaluated and might be of not much use in the future. While new companies around the world can step in and take the market shares and have those positions. So what's the German answer here is, it's called Industry 4.0. So it's bringing together industrial production and digitization. You see a lot of robots here on the picture, and Germany is one of the economies or industries with the highest share of robots already, and that is just one example for modernized manufacturing. Climate protection, climate change. Many of the issues have been addressed. It has a long time been an issue of energy policy, so phase out of nuclear, phase out of coal, all those problems with additional grids additional grid that is needed, additional costs that are a problem in international competition. Now the focus is shifting towards the manufacturing sector. So what can industry do to reduce their emissions? So far, there have been exceptions from many regulations. There has been efficiency gains in the companies, of course, but we must find an answer to the question: how can steel production, aluminium production, chemical industry, and so on be carbon neutral by 2050? And there is no simple answer yet. That will need a lot of supports by governments, much more than we know it from the past. So that's in the national level, but there's also, and there's a lot of what both countries can learn from each other, but there's also an international level. That's my last slide. Look in the future, we've seen several waves of globalization, and we seem to be on the beginning of the third wave of globalization, which needs more governance structures in the future to secure the gains of globalization while making it resilient, or making value chains or keeping value chains resilient, and to help our countries and other democracies and market economies to be able to set standards in that competition between market economies and especially China as a state capitalist country. And we need global governments in order to find answers to global problems, global issues we have, and that we only can solve together. So global climate, of course, that's a global issue in terms of global climate targets, and the Paris process is continuing. The European Union is just discussing about raising its reduction targets to 55% by 2030. But I think we also need global cooperation on international price signals on carbon emissions, setting a price, giving a price to carbon, but that needs to be a similar one that's very, very diverse so far, and that brings a lot of trade distortions and competition problems. Global health, second pillar of a third globalization. We all see the pandemic right now as a global issue, and we must improve structures to prepare for future events in the future. Global trades, we need sanction mechanisms in case of violation of international regulation, and the trade system is very, very much under attack, or at least in a very problematic state. And we hope that with the new US administration, there can be steps taken to improve and strengthen the trade structures we have. And finally, we are talking about global security. And that's on the one hand side, traditional security issues, but also topics like cybersecurity, which is very dominant and growing problem in also for companies and for all forms of innovation and competition, and being better here in cooperating on securing data and securing protection of data and so on would be very, very helpful to help companies being able to digitize and benefiting from these new technologies. So thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward for our discussion.
Thank you very much, Dr. Barth, for highlighting the structural and policy challenges on a national and international level with regard to the recovery process that we're currently in. And now I would, without further ado, last but certainly not least, like to introduce Dr. Martin Schulz to you. Dr. Schulz is the Chief Policy Economist at Fujitsu in Tokyo, a position he took over about a year ago after spending almost 20 years at Fujitsu Research Institute as a senior economist and senior research fellow working on economic policy, finance, and international corporate strategies. He knows both Japan and Germany extremely well, so we are very much looking forward to your insights, Dr. Schulz, and I hand over the virtual microphone to you, not without reminding you of the timing, please, with regard to the question and answer session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Elsner. It is such a pleasure to be invited to this panel and to this discussion. And thank you very much for the Konrad-Adenauer-Foundation, really to getting these two sides together that are close to my heart. I mean, you said it, I'm 30 years in and out of Japan, 20 years working for a major Japanese company. But it is very, very important on a broader scale, because when we look at the other country, we often see it, well, with our own eyes. That means currently that from a Japanese perspective, Germany is tremendously interesting because of all the push towards renewable energy, which is way beyond Japan. Japan has about 20% renewable energy in electricity production. Germany already 45%. And that helps us tremendously here from a corporate level and also policy level to say, guys, the Germans can do it. We can do it too. This is where we have to go. And for an IT company, Fujitsu is the major Japanese IT services company. Well, the point Mr. Bescher was doing in the beginning is a very important one. We need digitalization for that. Mr. Barth was also pointing into that direction. We need to balance the grids. We need to connect things. We need to move around differently. Mr. Niemann, when we met the last time, it was atop the roofs in Roppongi Hills and talking about how we can connect Asia, how we can work together dealing with China and issues like that, how the EPA can be implemented. Now we are meeting in this online meeting, much more flexible, perhaps with a lower CO2 footprint. Very, very important. So this international connection is so very important. Another thing, just from the corporate side, Mr. Niemann has a Fujitsu notebook in front of him. With our colleagues in Germany, this is our biggest subsidiary, we are providing the German government, for example, with a lot of hardware. A lot of the data that is being used is produced in a data center with with almost zero CO2 footprint in North Rhine-Westphalia. This can be done, and this is the German perspective. You're way ahead in many things with renewable energy, where we are very interested in. But now look at Japan, and this is very interesting as well. I mean, we are producing this computer most likely in China, and we have been reducing the CO2 footprint, the energy being used in our factories, not only in Japan, our goal was in this renewable energy 100 group, so net zero by 2050. Of course, we are a gold sponsor in there as a digital company, but major Japanese companies are basically having these targets way ahead of the government. We basically are at the target that we were thinking about 2030, 30% reduction. So what the governments are thinking right now, we did this last year, and many other companies have been doing so as well. So the important point is, what can you do and what is most effective overall for the environment? And this is where Japan has a very different position than Germany. Germany was focusing on renewables and building it up, solar, wind power. Japan, as an importer of 96% of its energy, is focusing at its global supply chains, coal from Australia, liquid natural gas from Malaysia. How can this be improved? And what Japan has been doing over the last 10, 15 years, focusing on hydrogen as well, because hydrogen can be imported. It can be produced, for example, in the Middle East with carbon capture and storage, where it is still evolving, and then you will be able, turning it in ammonia, for example, into global supply chains, because we think here it is an illusion to go entirely towards renewable energy at home. One of the topics is what Mr. Makihara already brought up. Look at Tokyo, an urban agglomeration of 34 million people. You won't provide that with power, putting wind power around it and solar panels on each roof. This is simply not working. It is so far, it has been provided by major nuclear power plants, zero emission at least in terms of CO2. That with the Fukushima disaster came down, but now the question is now what? Like Germany, after switching off nuclear, coal was the first implementation. Japan focusing much more on gas. And what you have to be aware, Japan has been, as per capita CO2 emissions, about 9 tons already 30, 20 years ago, where Germany has just arrived. So this country has always been very, very efficient, a very strong focus on efficiency of the overall processes, of the overall production and what is being done, and is now changing. Another topic Mr. Makihara came up, and I'm looking at the time, but so many things so important, I think, is, well, look at the automotive industry. Mr. Barth came up with it, how is it being produced? Very important topic. In Germany now the focus is on electric vehicles. In Japan, not so much. So from the German perspective, you say, guys, what are you doing? You're still doing these old hybrids, which Japan has developing over 15 years for a long period. But now the world is EVs. Look at that. You have to switch immediately. That, of course, is a challenge for employment, but also overall how you use the cars. Again, look at Tokyo, 34 million people. People have cars, yes, but in the city, they use these cars for 12% of their daily trips. They don't use them. They have them in the front of the door for fun over the weekend. Usually they go by train, electric trains. This is connected. We had with Mr. Barth in Berlin a conference last fall, how to make cities much smarter. This is the focus of the Japanese government and Japanese companies, how we can digitally improve the overall CO2 footprint, fight global warming, but not by just focusing on one technology, but how to connect them the best way. A car in Tokyo is usually, well, a car in Japan has 48,000 kilometers lifetime usage. In Tokyo, it is less than 24,000 kilometers. When you take an EV for that, it is totally inefficient from a CO2 footprint because it would have to run 150,000 kilometers to make up for the costs of the CO2 footprint and the energy costs that you put into the battery. It is much smarter to have a hybrid here, and we have to think about it. So we need to connect things the best way. And this is where the society is changing. In Japan, it is called Society 5.0. In Germany, it's Industry 4.0. It is about efficiency, but also the next steps, how we can get things together. And that requires that we are not just saying, oh, we are the good green guys and everybody else has to do what we are doing. We have to look at the others and say, oh, look, that is a smart idea. A hybrid car might actually be such a bad thing. Hydrogen car might not be the best solution in a city, but it can be very effective in a truck when you're shipping, when you have to import energy, which Germany will have to do in the future as well. Sorry for rushing through all those topics, but my role is a little bit as a chief policy economist is looking at technologies, policy changes, society. And as a German in Japan, I'm always looking in these two directions and see, oh, this is smart what they are doing, but that is pretty good what these guys are doing. And we probably have to think in both directions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Schulz, for your passionate statement, which really shows how much you connect these two worlds, which we are talking about today. And I think you made a number of very important points. And given the excellent relationship between Japan and Germany already, and the fact that we can ask each other questions, we should certainly take the opportunity now to also at least look at one or two questions that came over the chat box. So I would like to now read one of them, which is a question from Takashi Yamamoto, professor of Takushoku University, apologies. And the question is addressed mainly to Professor Barth, and also, if you like, to the other panelists after that. And he asks, what would be one or two most important principles for economic growth after the pandemic crisis, which we are all certainly looking forward to, the end of this crisis. So probably first over to you, Dr. Barth, with regard to the question.
Yeah, thank you very much. And that's a good question and not one easy to answer. But I think there are two principles that were or that have been important in the past and will also will be important in the future, even if things are changing very, very quickly. First of all, is openness of markets, of international markets. I think global competition, international competition, international division of labor is one of the key fundamentals of our prosperity, and that has also be there in the future. And one danger is that we draw the wrong conclusions from the COVID crisis and believe value chains are so much so critical or so unstable that we must start reshoring everything we need. I think looking at the global pandemic last year, it was surprising that value chains have been so stable and that problems resulting from global transport and global division of labor were so little in a phase where every country was challenging with this pandemic. So openness of markets, and the second part, at least as important, is what Martin Schulz mentioned. It's innovation. It's struggling for the better solution day by day, and that's not always the big next thing, but very, very many small steps that come together to new solutions, to better solutions for the problems we have, and therefore, and that's prosperity in the end.
Would one of the other panelists as well like to come in on that question?
Well, when it's industry, I can't be quiet. Well, with innovation, of course, digitalization, because that is on the top of mind of basically everyone. We had this very, very fast transition when everybody got locked in at home. I'm at home as well. Hubertus Barth is at home. Mr. Niemann ventured into the office. That's great. I'm looking forward to do this more from the summer. But the big point here is, well, the new normal. So what are the next steps? How can we focus on our supply chains, for example, also in a more digital way that makes them way more efficient. It makes them more resilient. Plus, and that probably goes to Mr. Niemann, the government, in particular in Japan, really woke up because our employees, being so digital, they are looking at a government that has become much more important, regulating much more, even daily lives. And they say, guys, you have to do smart things in the future. So we need much greener and we need much more digital governments that can balance all these changes, all these innovations. And for that, government needs to become digital. Because this is what I learned when going to Denmark and many of the Northern European countries. Only a digital government really understands how to change all those things like nitty-gritty things like the grid and others. And this is where we have to really work together to see the solutions and really do the next steps with innovation.
Dr. Schulz, I think government digitalization matters are also still something that in Germany we can work on. Mr. Niemann, anything you would like to add, probably?
Yeah, I like, but I can only agree with Dr. Barth and Dr. Schulz, and I already pointed at this in my previous statement. Companies are under competition globally, and I think this is one of the experience I think we made now also in Germany, that also governments come into a competition now. We refer very often to examples, of course, sometimes much smaller countries who are far ahead in public digitization than, let's say, Germany. And I think this is really a challenge, maybe also for the administration and policy making in Japan, to not only point at others to speed up digitization, but also to become part of it. That is absolutely important, to be also a credible body to set the rules at the end. Thank you.
That is certainly true. From my experience living in Singapore for 5 years, this is one of the small countries that is obviously very much ahead in many of these matters. Now, probably we can take the time for one more question which has arrived, and which is, how do Germany and Japan exchange on the concepts of Industry 4.0 and Society 5.0? Where are the biggest differences? No less than that.
Well, if Mr. Bescho is not taking it, I'm jumping in because, well, these are the questions I'm not only getting a lot, but I've been researching for such a long time. Industry 4.0 became such a big topic in Japan when it started in Germany because, well, in particular with industry, automotive, Japan is looking a lot towards Germany. When I first raised it, I said, well, Industry 4.0, more productivity, more digitalization, efficiency and everything. And everybody here was saying, yeah, Martin, but that is so old school industry. Everything is now services. It is the society changing. We have to focus on the service economy. And I said, yeah, that is true. Then I let it go for 2 years. And then I tried it again. And everybody was, oh, yes, 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 because also China is coming in and we need to get all the supply chains, production and everything much more digitalized. The competition with the US, integrating these markets that are with new FTAs and everything needs to be Industry 4.0. And then Japan came. And of course, what you do when you're a second comer, you put one on top of it. You don't say industry, you say society, and you don't say 4, you say 5. And then the things became too lofty. It became too general. And this is where I probably have to kick Mr. Bescho a little bit, but he knows what I mean, is, well, when you have a too general concept, nothing happens. Everybody says, oh yeah, yeah, we need all this new society. So the important point, and where I got so happy with Mr. Bescho's initial comments and with Makihara's comments, is now the government in Japan is really focused on these issues because there is a clear target. CO2 emissions, global warming, that sharpens the mind. And it's not 2050, it's 2030. That is in 9 years. And everybody has to do their parts and everybody's being pushed. And this is where such a concept makes sense after a while, after let's almost 10 years happening very little.
Thank you very much. Anything you would like to add, Mr. Niemann or Dr. Barth, or probably Mr. Bescho as well?
I think, very briefly, I think the interesting point Martin Schulz made is also that those things in Japan, so those trends like digitization and carbon reduction are more integrated, and as a more holistic concept for addressing societal challenges. While in Germany, these are more or less 2 pillars, and we are just starting and exploring where one thing can help and can add benefit to the other, and so maybe that's one of the conceptual differences, and also issues where Germany can learn from what the second step Japan has done.
What I found, I mean, I would agree with Dr. Schulz on evaluating the Society 5.0 concept. But what I found quite interesting was the comprehensive approach. Of course, it may become more blur, but what actually we envied Japan in a way is this still, I think, technology orientation. This in Germany, you have in the society, technology is not always seen positively. It's very often also seen as a threat. and to use technology to make our life easier, to even, for example, cope with the challenges of demographic change. I think that that is a concept we also need to discuss here in our society. And I think for this, at this point, the concept of Society 5.0 is giving us quite a good example. The interest on the Japanese side and Platform 5.0 is quite big. So we have already cooperation here in questioning. We have participation from Japan. We have working groups between companies and institutes, even also with other countries. Coming back to one point of digitization, of course, the government should become even also more digital, but the government has to deal with one aspect. Companies usually don't so much, at least, depends on their own ethics. It is, you have to make the whole society supportive of digitization. And you have to explain it in a way that they don't see it as a threat. And you, I mean, one of the failures of the digital tracking here in Germany in regard to COVID-19, which we have different experiences, much more positive in other countries in Asia, for example, has shown that this is not an easy process. And we are living here in a democracy, and we have in our democracy here in Germany many and very strong advocates of citizens' rights and transparency. And this has to be always taken into account. It turns on sometimes a little bit too ideological. This is my personal view. But on the other hand, the government is, let's say, here challenged, and it's not a very easy way. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments or for your answers to the question. Maybe I'll take advantage of my role as a moderator here to conclude our discussion with one question that I would like to ask to any of our panelists who would like to answer, which is that as we know, and as we as KAS always point out, sustainability has more than just the environmental aspect. We've also looked at the economic one today, but there's the social one as well, which is a little bit something that also came up in Mr. Niemann's latest statement. So we have these three dimensions: environment, economic, and social dimension. So do you see opportunities for Japan and Germany to cooperate and link up all the three dimensions of sustainability in their cooperation, and what would you see as promising areas in that regard? Thank you.
Well, I'm trying. Oh, Hubertus, you're going?
Yeah,
perfect.
I don't mind. I can try to start. But maybe 3 points. First of all, social security is based on prosperity, and so we need both indeed, but we can't secure the social pillar of sustainability if the economic pillar is not working. Secondly, social security is mostly organized on national level, even within the European Union. It's not on the European level, it's on national level. The standards are very different. The degree of inequality which is accepted in societies is very, very different. The level of security and what kind of risks should be attributed to the person and what should be taken by state structures, for example, it's very, very different. So that's not easy to cooperate or to copy a system from here or there. There are always aspects that might be interesting and you might be able to adapt something. But I think there's one area where cooperation is necessary, and that's when we talk about sustainability of international or sustainability within international value chains. So what are the minimum standards that we want to be well accepted from all suppliers, first tier, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and so on suppliers? What about social standards in international free trade agreements? I think that's easier if the democracies and market economic based countries find similar standards and joint way to handle this.
Well, let me get one step further. I actually think that sustainability, in particular social sustainability, which Mr. Niemann mentioned, is actually the glue that puts everything together. Green growth policies have failed in many levels. You can have a relative reduction, but you don't get to net zero targets with green growth policies. The balance is not working well. You have to cut, and that needs to be acceptable. And actually, we as a company are driven by our employees who want us to be more sustainable on many, many levels. We have this in industry associations where we can agree on one point, that we need to be more sustainable, have these targets. When we meet with the government, we have one point where we can agree upon, we need these steps and we can do it. When we are focusing on, well, doing things smarter in many ways and doing by step, but not just green growth, going beyond that with a social consensus that needs people taking them by the hand. You heard from Mr. Makihara, Mr. Suga was in Washington talking with the US about what? China, of course. Security is the most important in the relations Japan-US in the future too. But where they could agree upon was sustainability as one of the angles where working with China will continue and can work. And this is just coming out as news that China is saying, yeah, we need to go beyond that. So on each level, from our employees, from voters who are voting for the Green Party in Germany right now, to the association, to the government, to international cooperation, this sustainability target is really something that provides a big lever right now and pushes us ahead. And we should use that, and we should use it now. Who knows if it's still there in 5 years when everybody is concerned about the high costs.
I mean, again, this
yes, sure.
is a dialogue in societies. You have, when it comes to sustainability, you have a lot of different views about sustainability and responsibility and also the burden to share. The recent law in Germany on the sustainability of supply chains showed this. There was a very heated discussion in Germany and also within the federal German government. And it was a compromise that came out and was presented. And I think it was in so far a good one, as it really tried to balance out the interests. It's exactly what Dr. Barth said. Of course, social security, social welfare is important, but the foundation for this is a wealthy country, is a wealthy economy, is actually international trade and international exchange. And we all restated this here in this discussion. And that will be a very, let's say, very lively, but also, I would say, a very heated discussion in the future. What is actually the degree of sustainability, which is still in my own interest, and which should be established on an international or global level. Just one example, in our yearly annual economic consultations with the METI, this law in Germany was also discussed. There was a lot of interest on the Japanese side and what it will mean to companies. And I think also the trade policy, to which degree we combine our free trade agreements with obligations of sustainability. On one hand, we have a modern one with Japan, and definitely Japan is sharing the same values. But Japan, as a solitaire, can be flexible in his foreign trade policy. The EU now is on its way to even include more sustainability targets in its trade policy. And then at the end, we will see how successful that will be, at least in the short and midterm. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all of you. And while we could certainly spend much more time to discuss all these most interesting aspects, it is unfortunately time to conclude our discussion. And I would like to sincerely thank our experts for their extremely insightful and inspiring statements today and for the lively discussion. And likewise, I would like to obviously extend a heartfelt thank you to all colleagues at KAS in Tokyo and in Berlin, including also, of course, our technical team for their dedication and excellent work to organize this event today. Now, I have some good news for you at the end, which is that my dear colleagues wisely and thankfully would not let a trained lawyer like me present conclusions of a session discussing economic topics. So instead, for this purpose, I am pleased to hand over to my colleague, Mr. Jan Czernitsky, the policy advisor on international trade in our economics and innovation department at KAS head office. And then thereafter, Barbara Völkel will bring our session to a close with her final remarks. For now, thank you very much for your kind attention so far, and over to you, Jan. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Gisela, and good still morning or afternoon, wherever you are. I think we had 18 intensive minutes of discussions and all got lots of input on how a sustainable economic recovery after the COVID-19 pandemic could look like. From my understanding, the discussion focused on four main topics. The first of it was COVID-19. We all know we are still in the middle of the pandemic, even if we may hope that an end is at least not so far away. As the panelists pointed out, the pandemic proved to be an accelerator for transformation and uncovered, as Mr. Barth pointed out, some disruptive potentials. I was a little bit surprised, to be honest, that Mr. Besho pointed out that even in Japan, there are issues about data usage that came up with the pandemic and different and changed patterns of use of data, as we of course also experience in Germany. The panelists agreed that supply chains actually proved to be surprisingly stable during the pandemic, and that there should definitely not be any approaches to drastically change supply chains or even to look at something like decoupling, because it were the supply chains, as Mr. Barth stressed, that actually saved us in many ways during the pandemic and were something very good during the pandemic. There were discussions about three main different industries. We talked about infrastructure, about renewable energies, and about the automobile industry. There seemed to be consensus that the German and the Japanese companies have different strength in the different industries, especially, as Mr. Schulz pointed out, in the automobile industry. But that, of course, brings about chances to cooperate and to learn from each other and, to find synergies here. Special importance was given by Mr. Niemann, but also by Mr. Barth, on the understanding that it's in many cases private companies that cooperate, not only the state. So that it should be very carefully discussed that it's not only decisions of governments that count here, but also private companies and, of course, the society that needs to be considered in any reforms after the pandemic. And that it's not only something that the government would do. One point that came up in all the presentations was climate protection and the way how to cope with it and how to find solutions for that. We learned from Mr. Makihira and also Mr. Besho that Japan is setting up a very ambitious program for climate protection. The same is true for Germany. There should be a good chance for cooperation here, but there also is an elephant in the room that no one of the panelists actually named, but it's the carbon border adjustment mechanism that the European Union is just working about. Because what I learned from a study of our colleagues of the energy security program in Hong Kong, that we may expect, not a very, how do you say that, a very positive attitude of Japanese actors towards carbon border adjustment mechanism of the European Union. So I think that's a point where discussions need to start now, because Europe and Japan will put price tags on greenhouse gas emissions. And the best way to keep borders open and trade possible in this way is to discuss on how to interconnect the different pricing systems soon. Because I fear if both regions, Japan and the EU, would decide to have different pricing mechanisms, it could lead to kind of closing of borders because of carbon pricing. There should be chances of discussing about interconnection of pricing, but these chances should be taken soon, from my point of view. That brings me to the conclusion that also all of the panelists came to. There's need for good, stable, and transparent global rules and institutions. Most panelists pointed out that we need institutions like WTO, United Nations World Health Organization. These organizations seem to be a bit weak at the moment. So Japan and Germany should team up to strengthen these, to have clear roles and keep borders open. And if that is not possible, of course, there are bilateral solutions like free trade arrangements, which exist between Germany and Japan. Mr. Niemann pointed out that there are also different bilateral fora between Japan and Germany that can be used to discuss institutions and rules, because as I think, as a representative of an organization that works for democracy and rule of law, in the end, what counts is that all actors that want to cooperate have clear rules that orient cooperation. And if we do not have them, we should work for that together. I think Japan and Germany, with their power in at least economic matters, could be nations that can work on that. So I would like to close with a plea for clear international rules and regulations that should be fostered by Japan and Germany. Thank you and have a good afternoon.
Yeah, thank you very much. Also from my side, first of all, I would quickly, given the time, ask you to give your best smile so that we can take a small group picture, a digital one together. I think our technique is ready, so let's go for that. Perfect. I think that should be great. And of course, I still want to say a huge thank you to our panelists, to Mr. Niemann, to Mr. Bart, Mr. Schulz. Thank you, Mr. Besho, for your time. Also, thank you, Gisela Elsner and Jan Czernitsky, and the Japanese embassy, and particularly the KAS team with Rabia Brau, with Naoki Sanoshika-san, for their enormous efforts to digitally celebrate 160 years of German-Japanese relations, even in times of a pandemic, and particularly in times of a pandemic. It's necessary that democracies around the world stand together. And in our discussion, and also in our discussion on Monday regarding security cooperation, it definitely showed that there is enough to do for at least the next 160 years of bilateral and multilateral relations. And having said that, KAS is looking forward to accompanying and building further bridges between our countries. And I wish you a pleasant day. Thank you also to the viewers for your attendance, and speak and see you very soon.